True terror found me when I stood beside humanity. Kevovra had studied humans for 12 cycles, and she believed she understood them completely. She stood on the observation deck of the GSV Harmonious Dawn, watching the stars blur past as the Council peacekeeping vessel cut through hyperspace toward the Korath system. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she reviewed her notes on the human contingent that had joined this mission. Primitive, emotional, clever in unexpected ways. These were the words that filled her reports. The Villani Diplomatic Corps had assigned her to observe humanity's first joint operation with the Galactic Council, and she intended to document everything. The humans had arrived 3 days ago, a squad of 12 soldiers from something called the United Earth Defense Force. Ketvora found them fascinating in the way one might find a particularly intelligent pet fascinating. They were short-lived creatures, barely reaching a century if they were lucky. They came from a death world where everything seemed designed to kill them. The gravity too strong, the predators too numerous, the weather too violent. Yet somehow they had crawled out of that hellish cradle and reached for the stars. She heard laughter echoing from the corridor behind her and turned to see 3 of the humans walking toward the mess hall. They moved with an easy confidence that seemed almost reckless. One of them, a female called Sergeant Moon Hyjin, noticed Kethvora and offered a wave. "Observer Kethvora," Moon called out. "Come eat with us." Kethvora hesitated. The invitation seemed genuine, but eating with the subjects of her observation felt unprofessional. Still, understanding their social behaviors was part of her mission. She followed them into the mess hall, where the rest of the human squad had gathered around a long table. Captain Park Gi-hoon sat at the head, distributing portions of something the humans called ramen from a large pot. Ketvora had learned that humans often prepared their own food, even when the ship's synthesizers could provide perfectly adequate nutrition. They claimed it tasted better, though her analysis showed no meaningful nutritional difference. "Observer," Park said with a nod. "Please join us." She took a seat at the edge of the group, her sensory tendrils twitching as she absorbed the scene. The humans passed bowls to each other, their movements synchronized without any apparent communication. Private Cho Sung-min gave the largest portion to Corporal Baek De-yoon, who'd spent the morning in heavy training. No one asked or negotiated. They simply knew. "You're studying us," Park said, and it was not a question. Ketvora's secondary eyes focused on him while her primary eyes continued observing the others. "It is my assignment, Captain. The Council wishes to understand how humans operate in joint military contexts." "And what have you learned?" She considered the question carefully. "Your species forms social bonds with remarkable speed. You have known these soldiers for what, 3 standard cycles? Yet you interact as if you share genetic lineage." Park smiled, and Kethvara noted how the expression transformed his face from stern to warm in an instant. "They are my family," he said simply, "but you share no blood relation. Family is not about blood, observer. Family is about who stands beside you when the darkness comes." Kethvara filed this statement away for later analysis. Human social structures continued to puzzle her. They formed attachments based on abstract concepts like loyalty and shared experience, rather than the logical bonds of genetics and obligation that governed most civilized species. The ship's communication system chimed, and Admiral Vethral's voice filled the mess hall. "All senior staff to the command deck immediately. Updated intelligence on the Korath situation has arrived." The humans rose as one, their meals abandoned without complaint. Kethvora followed, noting how their demeanor shifted from relaxed to alert in the span of a heartbeat. It was like watching a predator wake from sleep. The command deck was crowded with council officers when they arrived. Admiral Vethral, a towering Korshan with scales the color of dried blood, stood before the main display. His expression troubled Kethvora. She had never seen a Korshan look afraid before. We have confirmed the identity of the raiders attacking Korth 4, Vethril announced, his voice tight. They are not bandits or pirates. The display changed, showing a creature that made Kethvora's hearts freeze. 8 limbs, a body covered in chitinous armor, and a mouth designed for one purpose: to consume sentient flesh. Vorax Reapers, someone whispered. The room erupted in fearful murmuring. The Vorax had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, appearing without warning to harvest entire populations. They were the monsters that parents used to frighten disobedient children, except they were horribly real. Current estimates suggest 300 Reapers on the surface, Vethril continued. The colony had a population of 212. We believe approximately 60 may still be alive, barricaded in the emergency shelter. Reinforcements from the 4th Fleet are 6 days away. And the colonists? Park asked, his voice cutting through the noise. They have supplies for perhaps 2 days, maybe 3 if they ration carefully. Kethvora watched the council officers exchange glances. She knew what they were thinking. The math was impossible. By the time reinforcements arrived, there would be nothing left to save. We should wait, Commander Thelvos said, her feathers flattening against her skull. To engage 300 Reapers with our current forces would be suicide. Heads nodded around the room. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. Are there children down there? Park asked. The question hung in the air. Vethril consulted his datapad. 47 minors of various species, yes. Kethvora expected Park to argue, to make passionate speeches about honor and duty. Instead, he simply turned to his squad. Gear up. We drop in 1 hour. Captain, Vethril said. I cannot authorize. Then don't, Park replied. But we're going. Observer Kethvora, you're welcome to join us. Someone should record what happens. He walked out, his squad following without hesitation. Kethvora stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. 12 humans against 300 Reapers. It was madness. And yet, she found herself moving toward the shuttle bay, her feet carrying her toward a destiny she could not yet comprehend. True terror found me when I stood beside humanity. The shuttle shook as it descended through Kara 4's atmosphere, and Kethvora gripped her restraints with all 4 of her hands. She still could not believe she was here. When she had followed the humans to the shuttle bay, she had expected someone to stop her. Admiral Vethril, Commander Thelvos, anyone with sense. Instead, the council officers had watched in silence as the 12 humans loaded their weapons and boarded the dropship. No one had tried to help. No one had volunteered to join. They had simply let the humans go to their deaths. Captain Park sat across from her, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. His squad did the same, their movements calm and methodical, despite what waited for them below. Kethvora studied their faces, searching for any sign of the fear that logic demanded they feel. You're wondering why we're doing this, Park said, without looking up. The thought had crossed my mind, Captain. You are 12 soldiers against 300 Reapers. The mathematics are not in your favor. Sergeant Moon laughed from her seat nearby. Observer, humans have never been good at mathematics. She's right, Park agreed, finally meeting Kethvora's gaze. Our entire history is filled with impossible odds. We've always been too stubborn or too stupid to know when we should surrender. But why? Why throw away your lives for colonists you've never met? They aren't even your species. Park was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that Kethvora had not heard before. Let me ask you something, Observer. If it were Vellani children down there, 47 of them, scared and waiting to die, what would you do? Kethvora opened her mouth to respond but found no words. The honest answer shamed her. She would have followed orders, waited for reinforcements, done the logical thing. and 47 children would have died while she calculated acceptable losses. Exactly, Park said, reading her silence. The difference between humans and most species isn't that we don't feel fear. We feel it more than you can imagine. The difference is that we've learned to carry our fear with us while we do what needs to be done. Private Cho leaned forward, his young face serious. My grandmother survived the soul floods when she was 8 years old. A stranger, someone she'd never met, carried her through 3 kilometers of wreckage while his own family was still missing. He saved her life because that's what humans do. We save each other and we don't ask for reasons. But these aren't humans down there, Kethvara pressed. They're Korthan, Villani, Thresik species that have often opposed humanity in council debates. Corporal Beak spoke up for the first time, his voice a low rumble. Observer, do you think those children care about politics? Do you think they're sitting in that shelter thinking about trade negotiations? They're scared, and they're waiting for someone to save them. We can be that someone. The shuttle's pilot announced their approach, and the squad began their final preparations. Kethvara watched as they helped each other secure armor and distribute ammunition. Each movement spoke of trust built through countless hours of training and shared hardship. Park knelt beside her and held out a small device. Emergency beacon. If things go bad, press this and the shuttle will extract you. You're an observer, not a soldier. No one expects you to fight. Kethvara took the beacon with trembling tendrils. And what about you? What if things go bad for your squad? Park smiled that transforming smile again. Then we go down fighting. That's the human way. The shuttle touched down with a heavy thump, and the rear hatch opened to reveal a nightmare. The colony of Haven's Rest burned in the distance, smoke rising against the amber sky. Structures that had once housed families now stood as hollow shells. The air carried the scent of ash and something worse, something organic and wrong. The squad moved out in perfect formation, their boots silent on the scorched earth. Kethvara followed, staying close to Sergeant Moon as instructed. Every shadow made her heart race. Every distant sound made her want to run. Stay calm, Moon whispered. Fear is natural. Just don't let it control you. They advanced through the ruins, passing evidence of the attack that made Kethvara want to purge her stomach. She saw personal belongings scattered in the streets, a child's toy, a cooking implement, a datapad with a family portrait still displayed on its cracked screen. These had been homes just days ago. These had been lives. Captain Park raised a fist, and the squad froze. He pointed toward a collapsed building where something moved in the shadows. Kethvara's heart pounded so hard, she was certain the Reapers could hear them. But it was not a Reaper that emerged. A small Korthan stumbled out from the rubble, her scales covered in dust and dried blood. She could not have been more than 6 cycles old. When she saw the humans, she let out a cry of terror and tried to run. Private Kim Soo-yeon was faster. She caught the child gently and held her close, whispering words in a soft voice that Kethvara had not known humans possessed. She, little one, we're here to help. You're safe now. The child struggled for a moment, then collapsed into Kim's arms, sobbing. Kim looked to Park with determination burning in her eyes. Captain, we need to find that shelter now. Park nodded. He checked his scanner and pointed toward the eastern ridge. 1 kilometer. The shelter is built into the mountainside. They moved faster now, the child cradled in Kim's arms. And then they heard it screaming. Not one voice, but many, rising from the direction of the shelter. The screaming of the desperate, the dying, the hopeless. Park's expression hardened into something that made Kethvara's blood run cold. Double time, move. The humans began to run, and Kethvara ran with them, her fear forgotten in the face of something stronger, the need to reach those voices before they went silent forever. True terror found me when I stood beside humanity, The first wave came 23 minutes later. Kethvora crouched behind a barricade of debris, her hands wrapped around a human rifle that felt alien and wrong in her grip. Sergeant Moon had shown her how to use it. Point at the enemy. Pull the trigger. Try not to die. Simple instructions for an impossible situation. "Why did you give me this?" Kethvora had asked when Moon pressed the weapon into her hands. Moon's answer had been equally simple. "Because you're standing with us now. That makes you one of us." The Reapers appeared on the horizon like a black tide, hundreds of chitinous bodies moving in perfect synchronization. They did not run, but rather float across the terrain, their 8 limbs carrying them over obstacles that would have stopped any vehicle. The sight made Kethvora want to drop her weapon and flee. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to save herself. But she looked at the humans beside her, and she stayed. "Steady," Park called out. "Let them get close. Make every shot count." The Reapers drew nearer. 200 meters, 150, 100. Kethvora could see their mandibles clicking with anticipation. She could smell their hunger on the wind. Fire! The barricade erupted with thunder. Kethvora pulled her trigger and felt the rifle kick against her shoulder. She did not know if she hit anything. She simply fired and fired until the weapon clicked empty. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the magazine while reloading. The first wave broke against their defenses, but not without cost. Private Yoon took a claw through his chest, and his screams ended when Park put him down with a mercy shot. Kethvora wanted to vomit. She wanted to cry. Instead, she picked up Yoon's rifle and kept firing. Second wave incoming. Corporal Beak shouted. More Reapers poured over the ridge, replacing the fallen without hesitation. These creatures knew no fear, no doubt, no mercy. They existed only to consume, and today they intended to consume everyone Kethvora had come to protect. The defense began to crumble. There were simply too many enemies and too few defenders. Kim fell with a wound to her leg, still firing as Cho dragged her back toward the shelter. Lee went down next, his broken arm finally failing him. Moon fought like a demon despite her injuries, but even demons have limits. Beak stood at the center of the line, a wall of muscle and fury that refused to break. Reaper after Reaper fell to his hands, but they kept coming. One managed to get behind him, its claws raised for a killing strike, and a Vellani child screamed from the shelter entrance. Beak turned. Instead of defending himself, he threw his body over the child, taking the blow meant for her. 11 wounds, Kethvora counted them, 11 wounds, and still he rose. He lifted the child and carried her to safety, collapsing only after she was inside. "Beak!" Moon screamed. "Protect them," Beak whispered, and then he was still. Something broke inside Kethvora, something she had not known existed. She had spent her entire life believing that she understood the universe, that logic and reason could explain everything. But there was no logic in what she had just witnessed. There was no reason that could explain why a human would give his life for an alien child he had never met. And yet Beak had done it without hesitation. Captain Park fought his way to Kethvora's position, his armor cracked, his face bloody. "Fall back to the shelter. We make our final stand there." They retreated, dragging the wounded with them. Only 6 humans remained standing, Park, Moon, Cho, Kim, and 2 others whose names Kethvora had never learned. 6 humans against an army. 6 humans who refused to die. The Reapers surrounded the shelter entrance, their numbers blocking out the sky. They paused, perhaps savoring the moment, perhaps calculating the most efficient way to tear their prey apart. Park stood at the front, his rifle empty, a knife in each hand. Moon stood beside him, barely conscious but still upright. The others formed a line behind them, ready to sell their lives as dearly as they could. "I want you all to know something," Park said, his voice calm. "I'm proud to have served with you. Whatever happens next, remember, we gave those kids a chance. That's more than anyone else was willing to do. Kethvora felt tears streaming down her face, tears she had not known her species could produce. She finally understood what she was seeing. This was not suicide. This was not madness. This was love, a love so fierce, so absolute that it made death meaningless. Park's hands were shaking. She could see them trembling as he gripped his knives. He was afraid, terrified, probably, but he stood anyway. He stood because somewhere behind him, 47 children were counting on him to buy them a few more seconds of life. That was the terror she had never been prepared for. Not human violence, not human strength, but human choice, the choice to face certain death for people who would never know their names. Park turned to Kethvora and pressed his sidearm into her hands. "Last magazine," he said. "Protect the kids." The Reapers began to advance. Park raised his knives and smiled. And then the sky split open with fire. True terror found me when I stood beside humanity. The first Reaper came from nowhere. One moment, Kethvora was running beside Sergeant Moon, her lungs burning with effort. The next, a nightmare of chitin and claws exploded from the ruins to their left, its 8 limbs propelling it toward them with horrifying speed. Kethvora froze, her body refusing to obey her commands. This was how she would die, paralyzed by terror while a monster tore her apart. But Moon did not freeze. The sergeant stepped forward, placing herself between Kethvora and the Reaper. Her rifle barked twice, the shots finding the gaps in the creature's armor. The Reaper stumbled but did not fall. Moon fired again, and her weapon clicked empty. Without hesitation, she dropped the rifle and drew her combat knife, a blade no longer than her forearm, against a creature twice her size. The Reaper lunged, and Moon met it head-on. She ducked under its slashing claws, driving her knife into the joint where its primary limb connected to its torso. Dark ichor sprayed across her armor. The creature screamed, a sound that would haunt Kethvora forever, and swung again. Moon twisted away, but not fast enough. 3 claws raked across her side, tearing through armor and flesh. Moon did not scream. She did not retreat. Instead, she stepped closer, using her wounded body to trap the Reaper's limb, and drove her knife up through the creature's throat. The Reaper collapsed, taking Moon down with it. "Sergeant." Kethvora finally found her voice. Moon pushed herself free from the corpse, one hand pressed against her bleeding side. "I'm fine. Keep moving." A second Reaper appeared, and then a third. The humans responded with brutal efficiency. Private Cho fired 3 rounds into the first, while Corporal Beak tackled the second, wrestling it to the ground with raw strength that should have been impossible. Beak's knife found the creature's brain stem, ending its struggles. Captain Park's voice cut through the chaos. "Forward. Don't stop for anything." They pushed on, Moon leaning heavily on Kethvora, despite her protest that she was fine. The screaming from the shelter grew louder, more desperate. Through the smoke and dust, Kethvora could see the shelter's entrance, a reinforced door built into the mountainside. A dozen Reapers clustered around it, clawing at the metal, trying to reach the prey inside. "Contact front," Park called out. Weapons free. The humans opened fire as one, their combined assault cutting down 4 Reapers before the creatures could react. The survivors turned toward this new threat, and Kethvora saw intelligence in their compound eyes cold, calculating intelligence that measured the humans and found them wanting. The Reapers charged. What followed was violence unlike anything Kethvora had witnessed. The humans fought without elegance or hesitation. They fought like their home world had taught them, like survival was not given, but earned through blood and pain. Private Lee took a claw through his shoulder and responded by shoving his rifle's barrel into the Reaper's mouth and pulling the trigger. Corporal Beak crushed a Reaper's skull with his helmet when his knife broke off in another creature's chest. And through it all, they protected each other. When Kim stumbled, Cho was there to catch her. When Park's rifle jammed, Moon bleeding, barely standing shot the Reaper that had been lunging for his throat. The last Reaper fell, and suddenly there was silence. Kethvora looked at the humans around her and felt something shift in her understanding of the universe. They were covered in blood, their own and the Reapers', their armor dented and torn. Moon could barely stand. Lee's arm hung useless at his side. Yet not one of them suggested retreat. Not one of them looked toward the shuttle beacon and the escape it offered. Park approached the shelter door and knocked 3 times. "This is Captain Park Ji-hoon of the United Earth Defense Force. We're here to help." Silence. Then a voice, trembling and afraid. "How do we know you're not Reapers?" "They make sounds, they mimic voices. My name is Park Ji-hoon. I am 34 years old, born in Busan, and I have a daughter named Yuna who turned 6 last month. I promised her I would come home. But before I can do that, I need to get you out of here. Please let us help." The door hissed open. A thoracic male peered out, his compound eyes wide with terror and hope. Behind him, Kethvora could see others, adults and children of 3 different species, huddled together in the darkness. "There are more coming," the thoracic said. "We saw them on the sensors. Hundreds of them." Park nodded calmly. "Then we'll hold them off." "How many survivors?" 19, including 12 children. Private Kim stepped forward, the young Korthan girl still clinging to her. "Make that 20. Found this little one in the ruins." The Korthan child reached out toward the shelter, crying something in her native tongue. An adult Korthan female pushed through the crowd and caught the child in her arms, weeping with relief. Captain Park turned to his squad. "Establish defensive positions around the entrance. Kim, Cho, get inside and tend to the wounded. Moon, Lee, get your injuries treated. That's an order." "Captain," Moon protested. "That's an order, Sergeant. I need you alive for what comes next." Kethvora contacted the Harmonious Dawn. "Admiral Vethril, we've reached the shelter. 19 survivors confirmed, plus 1 additional child. Requesting immediate extraction." The Admiral's voice crackled through the communicator. "Extraction shuttle is en route. ETA 2 hours. 2 hours? Admiral, there are hundreds of Reapers approaching. We don't have 2 hours. That is the best we can do, Observer. The shuttle must navigate around the Reaper swarm to avoid detection." Park took the communicator from Kethvora's hand. "Understood, Admiral. We'll hold." "Captain, that's impossible. 30 minutes, that's how long until the swarm reaches you." Park smiled that terrible, wonderful smile. "Then we'll hold for 31. Park out." He handed the communicator back to Kethvora and began checking his ammunition. She stared at him, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. "You're going to die," she whispered. "Maybe," Park admitted. "But those children won't. And that's all that matters." True terror found me when I stood beside humanity. The dropships came screaming through the clouds like angels of vengeance. Kethvora watched in disbelief as 5 human vessels descended upon the Reaper horde, their weapons blazing with fury that lit up the darkening sky. She did not understand. The Harmonious Dawn had only 1 shuttle, and reinforcements were 6 days away. Where had these ships come from? A voice crackled through Captain Park's communicator. "Captain Park, this is Commander Shin Jae-1 of the UEDF Indomitable. We intercepted your distress call 3 hours ago. Sorry, we're late. Traffic was terrible." Park let out a laugh that was half sob. "Commander, you have no idea how glad I am to hear your voice." "Sit tight, Captain. We're cleaning house." The dropships landed in a ring around the shelter, and human soldiers poured out like water from a broken dam. These were not the tired, wounded survivors of Park's squad. These were fresh troops, armed and armored and burning with purpose. They fell upon the Reapers with a ferocity that made Kethvora's blood run cold. But it was not their weapons that made her heart stop. It was their faces. She had seen humans fight before, watched Park's squad battle impossible odds with grim determination. But these newcomers fought differently. They fought with rage pure, incandescent rage that transformed them into something beyond soldiers. They did not simply kill the Reapers. They annihilated them. A human sergeant ripped a Reaper's limb off with his bare hands. A corporal charged into a group of 3 enemies with nothing but a combat knife, screaming words that Kethvora's translator could not process. Everywhere she looked, humans were doing the impossible, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. The Reapers broke. In 5 centuries of recorded history, no one had ever witnessed Virak's Reapers retreat. They were mindless hunters, driven by instinct and hunger. They did not know fear. They could not know fear. But they learned. The surviving Reapers fled into the wilderness, pursued by human gunfire and human screams. Kethvora could hear the soldiers cursing, demanding the creatures return and face them. It was madness, beautiful, terrifying madness. Commander Shin approached Park's position, her face hidden behind a cracked helmet. "Captain, are you injured?" "Nothing serious. The wounded are inside the shelter. We have 47 children and 12 adults, all stable." "And your squad?" Park's expression flickered with pain. "8 dead. 4 wounded, including myself." Shin placed a hand on Park's shoulder. "They died heroes. We'll make sure the galaxy knows." "They died humans," Park corrected. "That's all that matters." Medical teams rushed past, carrying supplies into the shelter. Kethvora stepped aside to let them pass, her mind struggling to process everything she had witnessed. A human medic stopped beside her, checking her for injuries. "I'm not wounded," Kethvora said. The medic shook her head. "Everyone who is down here is wounded, ma'am. Some wounds just don't bleed." Inside the shelter, the scene was chaos and joy intertwined. Wounded humans lay beside wounded colonists, all receiving the same care. Children who had been crying moments ago now clung to their rescuers, unwilling to let go. A thoracic father held his son and wept, thanking the humans in a language they could not understand. Kethvora found Corporal Beak on a stretcher, surrounded by medics working frantically to save his life. She had thought him dead, but humans apparently did not die easily. Moon sat nearby, her own wounds bandaged, her eyes fixed on her fallen comrade. "Will he survive?" Kethvora asked. "He's human," Moon replied, as if that answered everything. Perhaps it did. The evacuation took 3 hours. By the time the last colonist boarded a shuttle, the sun had set over Korath 4, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Kethvora stood at the entrance of the shelter, looking at the bodies being prepared for transport. 8 humans who would never see their home again. Captain Park joined her, his arm in a sling, his face exhausted. "What will you write in your report, Observer?" Kethvora considered the question for a long moment. She had come to this mission believing she understood humans primitive, emotional, clever in unexpected ways. She had been so arrogantly wrong. "I don't know," she admitted. "How do I describe what I witnessed today? How do I explain to the Council that everything they believe about humanity is incomplete? Tell them the truth." "The truth is terrifying, Captain." Park nodded slowly. "Yes, it is. But terror isn't always a bad thing, Observer. Sometimes terror is what keeps the monsters away." 3 months later, Kethvora stood before the Galactic Council, delivering her final report on humanity's participation in the Korath rescue mission. The chamber was silent as she spoke. her words echoing off ancient walls that had heard countless testimonies over the centuries. "I came to study humanity as a scientist studies specimens," she said. "I intended to catalog their behaviors, analyze their tactics, and provide the council with actionable intelligence. Instead, I learned something far more valuable." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Humans are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. They are not the strongest, the fastest, or the most numerous. But they possess something that no other species can match: a capacity for love so fierce that it transforms fear into courage and death into sacrifice. I watched 12 humans charge into certain death to save children they had never met. I watched them bleed and die for strangers of species that had opposed them in this very chamber. And when reinforcements arrived, reinforcements that were never ordered, never required to come, they fought not like soldiers following commands, but like family protecting family. True terror found me on Korath IV. But it was not the terror of facing humanity as enemies. It was the terror of standing beside them and understanding what makes them fight. They do not fight because they lack fear. They fight because their love is stronger than their fear." The council murmured among themselves. Ketvora stepped back from the podium and saw Captain Park standing at the rear of the chamber. He had recovered from his wounds, though scars still marked his face. When their eyes met, he offered a small smile. After the session ended, she found him in the gardens outside. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the twin moons rise over the council capital. "I finally understand human terror," Ketvora said. Park laughed softly. "And what is your conclusion?" "That I never want to face it. But I am grateful, profoundly grateful, that I was allowed to stand beside it." Park nodded and looked up at the stars. "That's why we fight so hard for peace, Observer. Because we know better than anyone what we're capable of when peace fails." Ketvora followed his gaze, thinking about the children now safe with their families, the soldiers who had died to save them, and the truth she had carried across the stars. True terror had found her not in facing humanity, but in standing beside them and learning that love, not hate, is what makes monsters of men.